Martin Ruhs is one of the speakers that joined the debate for the Lampedusa Dilemma conference, taking place at the EUI Forum on Migration, Citizenship and Democracy. Professor Ruhs brought the perspective that he develops in the book Price of Rights to make up suggestions on how academia and policy can work together. What is your view?
Well, what I focused on at this conference is how European countries and other high-income countries have responded to migration that's caused by geopolitical shocks, forced migration. So that's, for example, refugee migration from Northern Africa or the Middle East. And my point is that I think we need to have a much more systematic discussion of the various different policy responses that are possible, and especially of the long-term consequences that these policies cause. So in principle, you could admit migrants for protection, you could admit people on a permanent basis, on a temporary basis, or you could have a policy of containment, try to keep migrants out and try to protect them in countries of origin. And what we have seen over the past 25 years is that European countries have moved away from admission for protection to a policy of containment. So for example, with the wars in the former Yugoslavia, European countries did admit people fleeing those wars on a temporary basis. But nowadays, with people fleeing from conflict in Syria and also Northern Africa, the primary policy response is to try to keep people out. And my point is that you can criticize this on moral grounds, but importantly, you should also think through much more systematically the long-term consequences of these different policy options. So for example, containment might be perceived to be a rational response in the short term, but in the long run, some types of containment might actually increase pressures for irregular migration to European countries. So for example, in the case of Syria, it is perfectly possible that by containing people in neighboring countries, that these countries become quite unstable and might actually lead to further conflict and therefore produce more refugee flows and more irregular migration pressures to European countries. So it's really an appeal to take a more long-term view of the situation and to think through some of the long-term consequences of these short-term policies.
Migration is often approached from a cost and benefit perspective. What is, in your view, the risk? Is there a problem of losing sight of protection or any other conflict that we could end up with in taking that perspective?
Well, my general view is that when you analyze policies, it's quite useful to distinguish between analyzing and explaining the current situation, so analyzing what is the case, and separately analyzing what should be the case and discussing what should be the case. So I think, in my view, a cost-benefit analysis is really important to understand how high-income countries behave when it comes to immigration, but also when it comes to responding to geopolitical shocks. And that is because when high-income countries decide how to respond, they do very much think about their national interests. They often also think about the importance of protection, but that's clearly not the only objective. So by engaging in this discourse of costs and benefits, I'm not saying that just because a particular policy creates costs, we shouldn't pursue it. I'm saying to understand what countries do, we have to think about the costs and benefits of particular policies. Now, this very important second aspect of this debate is to ask morally what should be done. And I think that second debate is equally important. And that's why I think this conference has been very useful, because it has combined both perspectives. The analysis of reality and the determinants of actual policies, but also importantly, a discussion of the ethics of different policy options.